In the spring of 1873, a traveler stopped at a small inn on the Kansas prairie. He sat down for a meal, his back against a canvas curtain. He never got up. Neither did the 11 others who came before him. When neighbors finally broke into the abandoned cabin, they found something that would haunt Kansas for the next 150 years, a trapdoor in the floor, and beneath it, a pit soaked with blood. The family who ran the inn vanished without a trace, forever. This is the story of the Bloody Benders and the crimes that made them America's first family of serial killers. 1870, Southeast Kansas. Just 5 years after the Civil War ended, America was a nation in motion. Thousands of settlers pushed westward, chasing the promise of cheap land and a fresh start. The Homestead Act of 1862 offered 160 acres to anyone willing to work it, and Kansas was wide open. But this wasn't the Kansas of today. There were no highways, no telephones, no police stations every few miles. Out here, the nearest sheriff might be a 2-day ride away. And if you disappeared on the open prairie, well, people just assumed you kept moving west. The Osage Mission Trail was a lifeline, a dirt road cutting through the prairie, connecting Independence to Fort Scott. Travelers used it to move cattle, buy land, or simply pass through. And along this trail, lonely homesteads offered the only shelter for miles. If you were a traveler in 1871, tired, hungry, carrying cash to buy property, you had no choice but to trust strangers. You knocked on a door. You hoped they were honest. The Bender family was counting on that trust. In 1870, 4 people arrived in Labette County from parts unknown. They called themselves a family, though later investigations would cast doubt on that claim. John Bender Sr., known as Pa, was around 60 years old, over 6 feet tall, with heavy brows and a permanent scowl. He spoke almost no English, only German, and neighbors described him as sullen and unfriendly. His wife, known as Ma Bender, her real name possibly Almira or Elvira, was equally unpleasant. Heavy-set, sharp-tongued, she claimed to have supernatural powers. Neighbors whispered that she practiced dark magic. Then there was John Jr., around 25, tall and slender. Locals thought he was slow-witted. He had a habit of laughing at nothing, which unsettled everyone who met him. But it was the daughter who drew the most attention. Kate Bender was 23 years old, dark hair, dark eyes. By frontier standards, she was beautiful, and, unlike her family, she spoke perfect English with barely a trace of an accent. Kate called herself Professor Miss Katie Bender. She advertised in local newspapers as a spiritual medium and healer. She claimed she could cure blindness, speak to the dead, and locate lost items through seances. In a community of spiritualists, people who believed the dead could communicate with the living, Kate fit right in. But her lectures on free love raised eyebrows, even among believers. What nobody knew was that Kate's real talent wasn't healing. It was identifying which travelers were carrying the most money. The Bender cabin was small, just 16 by 24 feet. One room divided by a canvas curtain. The front section served as a store and inn. A crude wooden sign outside read, "Groceries." Travelers could buy supplies, get a hot meal, or rent a bed for the night. The back section, hidden behind that canvas curtain, was where the family lived. And beneath the floor, concealed by a trapdoor, was a pit, a cellar just deep enough to hide a body. Here's how it worked. A traveler would arrive, tired from the trail. Kate would greet him at the door with a smile. She'd offer a meal, seat him at the table, always with his back against the canvas curtain. while Kate charmed the guest with conversation. Maybe a card reading, maybe a palm reading. His head would be perfectly outlined against the white cloth. From behind the curtain, Pa or John Jr. would swing a hammer, one blow to the skull, sometimes two. The victim would collapse. Kate or Ma would slit his throat to make sure he was dead. Then the body was pushed through the trapdoor into the pit below, where it would bleed out overnight. The next morning, under cover of darkness, the Benders would drag the body to their apple orchard and bury it in a shallow grave. Then they'd clean the cabin, wash the blood from the floor, and wait for the next traveler. The killings began in late 1871. At first, no one connected the disappearances. Men vanished all the time on the frontier. Some kept moving west. Some were killed by bandits. Some simply didn't want to be found. But by 1872, the pattern was becoming hard to ignore. A man named Jones was found in Drum Creek with his skull crushed and throat cut. Then, 2 more bodies with identical wounds, all found within miles of the Osage Trail. In the winter of 1872, a man named George Newton Longcore left Independence, Kansas with his infant daughter, Mary Ann. They were heading to Iowa to start a new life. They never arrived. When the Benders' orchard was finally excavated, investigators found Mary Ann's body buried beneath her father. She was 7 or 8 years old. Her skull was not crushed like the others. Her arm was broken. Her knee was dislocated. Her breastbone was caved in. The coroner's conclusion: she had been buried alive. The Kansas City Times reported, "The little girl had long, sunny hair and some traces of beauty on a countenance that was not yet entirely disfigured by decay." Of all the Benders' victims, Mary Ann Longcore is the one history has never forgotten. By the spring of 1873, rumors were spreading. Travelers avoided the Osage Trail. Neighbors whispered about the strange family on the mound. But it took the disappearance of one particular man to bring everything crashing down. Dr. William York was a respected physician from Fort Scott. In March 1873, he set out along the Osage Trail to find his missing friend, George Longcore. Dr. York stopped at the Bender Inn. He asked questions. He ate a meal. He was never seen again. But Dr. York had made one fatal mistake. For the Benders, not for himself. He had 2 powerful brothers. One was a lawyer. The other was Colonel Alexander York, a Civil War veteran and member of the Kansas State Senate. When William didn't return, Colonel York assembled a search party of 50 men. They rode the length of the Osage Trail, questioning every homesteader, every traveler, every shopkeeper. On March 28, 1873, Colonel York arrived at the Bender cabin. Kate greeted him warmly. She admitted that yes, Dr. York had stayed with them, but he'd left safely, she said. Perhaps he'd been attacked by Indians? Then Kate made an offer. For a small fee, she said, she could use her psychic powers to help locate the missing doctor. Colonel York declined, but he wasn't convinced. Something about this family felt wrong. In early April 1873, the people of Osage Township had had enough. Too many disappearances, too many rumors. They held a meeting at the Harmony Grove Shrine early April 1873. The people of Osage Township had had enough. Too many disappearances, too many rumors. They held a meeting at the Harmony Grove schoolhouse. Every homestead in the area would be searched, no exceptions, Ool House. Every homestead in the area would be searched, no exceptions. The Benders knew the search was coming. On April 4th, 1873, neighbors noticed something strange. The Bender cabin was quiet. The animals were gone. The family had vanished. A few days later, a man inspecting the property noticed a strange depression in the soil near the orchard. He dug down, and then he started screaming. Body after body was pulled from the earth. Dr. William York, George Longcore, little Mary Ann, 7, 8, 9 more, some never identified. Within days, more than 3,000 people descended on the Bender property, journalists from New York, Chicago, and beyond. The cabin was torn apart by souvenir hunters. Every brick, every nail, every piece of wood was taken. The story of the bloody Benders had begun. Kansas Governor Thomas Osborne immediately offered a $2,000 reward for information leading to the Benders' capture. Colonel York added another $1,000 from his own pocket. In total, rewards reached as high as $5,000. $5,000. In 1873, that was a fortune, equivalent to nearly $131,000 today. Investigators tracked the Benders' abandoned wagon to the outskirts of Parsons, Kansas. The trail went cold. Some believed they fled south into Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Others thought they escaped to Mexico. For decades, false sightings poured in. In 1880, 2 people claiming to be the elder Benders were arrested in Nebraska. They confessed, then were proven to be imposters. In 1889, 2 women in Michigan were arrested as Ma and Kate Bender. The daughter of one of the victims identified them. A trial began. But evidence placed the women in Michigan during the murders. They couldn't have been the Benders. But there's another theory, one that many old-timers in Kansas believed until their dying day. In 1909, a dying man named Downer confessed to his wife. He claimed that Colonel York's search party had actually captured the Benders on the night of April 24, 1873, before the bodies were even discovered. According to Downer, the vigilantes executed all 4 Benders on the open prairie and buried them in an unmarked grave. The buffalo grass, Downer said, would grow over the grave. The prairie flowers would bloom, and no one would ever know. The $3,000 reward was never collected. Today, a historical marker stands along Highway 400, north of Cherry Vale. The Bender mounds still rise from the Kansas prairie, and somewhere beneath those lonely hills, the secrets of America's first serial-killing family remain buried. In 2023, archaeologists from the University of Kansas began excavating the Bender property. They found over 1,200 artifacts, broken dishes, wagon parts, nails from the cabin. But the location of the cellar, the pit where victims bled out, has never been confirmed. Some questions may never be answered. The bloody Benders remind us of something we'd rather forget. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it offers you a meal. Sometimes it reads your palm and promises to heal your sickness. And sometimes it waits behind a curtain. History is full of monsters we've chosen to forget, killers who were never caught, victims who were never named, stories that faded before anyone thought to write them down. But not here, not on this channel. Next time on the Murder Gazette, we go back even further, to 1797. To 2 brothers who killed not for money, not for revenge, but simply because they enjoyed it. The Harper brothers, America's first serial killers. Subscribe to the Murder Gazette, and I'll see you in the archives.